Everyone has a talent. Some people are born with it. Some people work their entire lives to develop it. I was born with nothing. Wait, that's not quite right. I was born with the ability to copy anything. Let me explain. My name is Marcus. Until last year, I was the most forgettable person you could imagine. I worked in a basement office entering data into spreadsheets. $18 an hour. No prospects, no connections, no future. Just a gray cubicle and gray walls and a gray life. Then came the Thursday that changed everything. I was cutting through Riverside Park on my way home when I saw him, an old man on a bench, playing chess against himself. Or so I thought. I stopped, thinking maybe I could learn the game. I'd always wanted to, but books were too boring and tutorials too long. The old man noticed me watching. Want to learn? I opened my mouth to say yes, but what came out was, "Could you play a game with me?" He raised an eyebrow, but set up the board anyway. We played. I won in 12 moves. The old man's face went pale. He accused me of cheating, of lying about being a beginner. I tried to explain I'd never played before, but he didn't believe me. He packed up his board and left, muttering about smart aleck kids. I walked home in a daze, replaying those 12 moves over and over, the way the pieces moved, the positions, the strategy. It was all still there, perfectly preserved in my head, like I'd been studying chess for years. What the hell had just happened? The next morning, I stopped at the coffee shop on 5th Street. There was a woman at the espresso machine, maybe 30, tattoos running up her arms, demonstrating latte art for a customer. A perfect Rosetta pattern blooming in the foam. I watched her hands. The control. The angle of the pour. 30 seconds, maybe less. When I got to work, I made myself a coffee from the break room machine. I grabbed the milk, and without thinking, I poured it the way she'd poured it. The Rosetta appeared. Perfect. Identical. I stood there holding the cup, staring at the foam, and the world suddenly felt different. Like I'd been playing life on hard mode my entire life and just discovered I'd been on easy mode the whole time. Over the next 3 weeks, I tested it. Carefully at first. A pianist playing in the subway station. I watched for 15 minutes, memorizing her hand movements. An hour later, I sat down at the same piano and played her song. She stopped and stared at me like I'd grown a second head, a guy at the gym showing his friend a boxing combo. I watched from across the room, pretending to stretch. The next day, I hit the heavy bag with every combination he'd shown. Every punch landed like I'd been training for months. It wasn't limited to physical skills either. I sat in on a meeting at work, our sales team doing a presentation to potential clients. Watched the lead presenter for an hour. His style, his pacing, his hand gestures, the way he handled objections. The next day, when my boss asked me to present some data I'd compiled, I stood up and gave the presentation exactly like he'd done it. The same words, the same energy, the same confident smile. My boss was impressed. Asked if I'd ever considered moving into sales. I hadn't, but I was starting to consider a lot of things. The money came naturally after that. I started small. Poker nights at O'Malley's bar, I'd watch a few rounds, learn the players' tells, absorb the winner's strategies, then jump in. Never enough to get noticed. Just enough to pay my rent. The first big score came on a Tuesday night. There was a regular at the bar. Everyone's called him the professor because he never lost. Wore glasses, dressed like an accountant, sat in the same corner every week. He'd clean out whoever sat across from him, then buy everyone around and leave. I watched him for 3 weeks. Studied how he bet, how he watched his opponents, how he bluffed, the way his left eye twitched when he had a good hand, the way he drummed his fingers when he was bluffing. On the 4th week, I sat down across from him. He looked at me like I was a lamb sitting down in front of a wolf. "You sure about this, kid?" Let's find out. An hour later, I took him for $800. His eye was twitching constantly, his fingers had stopped drumming. He kept asking if I'd played before, if I was sure I was new at this. I'm just having a lucky night, I said, racking up my chips. He didn't come back to O'Malley's for a month. When he did, he avoided my table. After the poker success, I got bolder. I found a chess tournament in the city, a real one, with prizes and everything, entered under a fake name. Won the amateur division, picked up a check for $2,000. The other players couldn't believe it. A nobody who'd never competed before, wiping the floor with people who'd been playing for decades. Then I discovered languages. I was on the subway one evening when I overheard two women speaking in what sounded like Russian, but not regular Russian. It was fast, slurred, with words I didn't recognize. One of them noticed me staring. "You understand this?" she asked in English. I shook my head. But I stayed on the train for 5 more stops, listening to them talk, watching their mouths move, the way they formed words. That night I went home and looked up Russian lessons on my phone, watched videos of native speakers for 2 hours. The next morning I went back to that same subway line and found them again. "Izviniti," I said. "Excuse me." They both stared at me. Then the one who'd spoken to me before laughed, shocked, delighted. "You learn fast," she said. Over the next month I learned Russian from those two women. Then Spanish from a guy who worked at my local taco stand. Then Mandarin from a YouTube channel I'd found. Within 4 months, I was conversational in 5 languages. And the weird thing was, people believed it. They assumed I'd been studying for years, that I was some kind of prodigy. No one questioned how a guy who'd never shown any interest in languages suddenly spoke 5 of them. Then came the cooking. "There's a restaurant in my neighborhood, tiny place, maybe 12 tables. The head chef is this guy named Carlos, who trained in Barcelona. He's got 2 Michelin stars and a waiting list 3 months long. I started going there once a week. Sat at the bar, ordered the same dish every time, and watched him work, the way he handled the knife, the way he timed the different components, the way he plated each dish like it was a work of art. After 6 weeks of watching, I went home and tried it, made the same dish he'd been making. Not perfectly, but close enough that when I brought it to a potluck at work, people asked where I'd ordered it from. I kept practicing, kept watching. Within 3 months, I could make his entire menu from memory. Not just the recipes, the technique, the timing, the way he moved his hands. One night, I brought him a dish I'd made. Tasted it, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, then suspicion, then, almost imperceptibly, respect. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "I had a good teacher," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and went back to his kitchen. A week later, he offered me a job, line cook. I'd come in after my data entry shift and work until midnight. It wasn't much pay, but I was learning, watching him train other chefs, watching how he ran the kitchen, watching how he managed his staff. Within 2 months, I was promoted to sous chef. Within 4, I was running the line on weekends when he took nights off. "You're wasted in that basement office," he told me one night. "You should go to culinary school. You'd make a name for yourself." I just smiled. There was no way to explain that I'd already learned everything he could teach me. And probably more. The trading was the big one. I'd been watching this guy named Richard at the coffee shop near my apartment. He worked for one of those prop trading firms, the kind that pays you to trade with their money as long as you make them profits. He always had 3 monitors open, running charts and data feeds I'd never seen before. I started sitting near him, ordering the same coffee, just watching, learning. After 2 weeks, I opened an account with $10,000 I'd saved from poker and cooking, copied his strategies exactly, his position sizing, his risk management, his entry and exit points. In the first month, I made 40%, in the second, 80%. By the third, I'd doubled my initial investment. And then I found a trading competition online run by one of the brokerages. Prize was $50,000 for the top performer. I entered. Won by a margin of 30% over second place. That's when things got interesting. A recruiter from a hedge fund reached out, wanted to know if I'd be interested in coming in for an interview. I said, sure, why not? The interview was in a glass tower in Midtown. The guy who met me, name was Chen, looked like he'd graduated from Wharton last week. Suit cost more than my rent. I watched your trading history, he said. Your risk-adjusted returns are better than some of our senior traders. How'd you learn to trade like that? I studied a lot, I said. He nodded like that was a sufficient answer. We're building a new algorithmic strategy. Would you be interested in joining the team? Not as a trader, more as a consultant. We'd pay you to help us develop the models. Consultant? Not even a full position. But the pay was good, and I was curious. I spent 3 months consulting for them, watched their quant team work, absorbed their algorithms, learned how they structured their trades, how they managed their risk, how they built their systems. By the end, I understood their entire operation better than some of the people who'd been there for years. And when I quit, politely, professionally, they tried to offer me a partnership. I declined. But I'd learned everything I needed. By month 9, I had $500,000 in the bank. Enough to quit my job, enough to move to a real apartment in the city, enough to start thinking about what came next. That's when Derek showed up. Derek had been my best friend in college. We'd lost touch after graduation. He'd gone to work for a hedge fund in New York. I'd gone to my data entry job. But we'd kept in loose contact through social media. When he reached out and said he was in town and wanted to catch up, I said sure. We met at a bar downtown. He looked good. Expensive suit, expensive watch, the air of a man who was doing well. We talked for an hour about our lives. I told him I'd been doing some trading, made some good decisions. He nodded, seemed interested, but not overly so. Then he asked to see my accounts. I laughed it off at first, but he was serious. He said he had an opportunity for me. A private investment group he was part of, high returns, low risk, but they did due diligence. They needed to see proof of funds before letting anyone in. I showed him not everything, just enough to prove I had capital. But his eyes went wide when he saw the number. $500,000 in a trading account, more in savings. That's a lot for a guy who used to do data entry, he said. Lucky trades? I said. He smiled. Sure, lucky. We wrapped up the night shortly after. He said he'd be in touch about the investment opportunity. I said I'd think about it, but when I got home, I had a bad feeling. Derek had always been a little greedy in college, always looking for the angles, the shortcuts, and he'd seen my money. Real money. Not a number on a screen. Actual cash I'd pulled out of the market. A week later, he called. We need to talk, he said. In person. He met me at the same bar, but this time his tone was different. He wasn't smiling. He came straight to the point. I did some checking, he said. Your trading history, the accounts, the wins, none of it adds up. You didn't go to business school, you didn't work at a firm, you don't have connections in the industry. You just suddenly appeared, making money no professional could consistently make. It's not against the law to be good at trading, I said. No, he agreed, but it's suspicious. And I got curious, so I looked deeper, found some things. My stomach tightened. Like what? Like the chess tournament. You entered with no prior competitive history and beat players who've been competing for decades. Like the languages you supposedly learned in months. Like the piano, the saxophone, the boxing, all the skills you apparently developed out of nowhere. The restaurant where you went from customer to sous chef in 4 months. He leaned forward. Marcus, what's your secret? I kept my face neutral. I practice a lot. In your spare time? Between data entry shifts? He shook his head. I don't buy it, and neither will the people I've been talking to. What people? He hesitated. Then, there's a group of investors who are very interested in where your money came from. They've asked me to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Give us 60% of your holdings and we'll consider the matter closed. Keep your money, keep your freedom, and we walk away. Refuse, and we start asking questions. Loud questions. To the IRS, to the exchanges, to anyone who might be interested in how a nobody with no training suddenly became a Wall Street wizard. I stared at him. My best friend. The guy I'd shared a dorm with, the guy I'd gotten drunk with at graduation, now sitting across from me, asking me to hand over $300,000 or else. You know this is extortion, I said quietly. He shrugged. I know this is business. You have something. I don't know what it is. But I'm not stupid enough to let a friend of mine have an unfair advantage while the rest of us work for our money. I thought about my options. If I went to the police, I'd have to explain how I'd made my money, which meant explaining the skills, which meant testing my ability in front of experts, which might mean ending up in a lab somewhere. If I paid him, I'd lose most of what I'd built, and he'd probably come back for more. The only third option was to beat him at his own game, without him knowing how. I spent the next week planning. First, I needed to understand Derek's world. He worked for a firm called Meridian Capital. Middle of the road, not huge, but not small. They managed about $200 million for wealthy clients. Not the kind of place that made headlines, but the kind of place that made money. I found their offices on the 43rd floor of a building in Midtown. Started showing up at the coffee shop across the street. Watching, learning. It took 3 days of observation, but I got what I needed. The names of their biggest clients, the structure of their investment process, and most importantly, the password to their client portal. How did I get the password? Easy. I watched their IT guy type it in one morning when he was running late and didn't notice me standing there. Once I had access, I pulled their portfolio data. Loaded it into a trading algorithm I'd built by watching 3 separate quant developers work on similar systems, ran some simulations, found some anomalies. Then I waited. Derek called again on day 4. So, what's your answer? The offer's still on the table? I'll meet you tomorrow? I said. Same bar. I'll have an answer. Make it the right one. I got to the bar early, had a seat in the back. Ordered a drink I didn't intend to drink. Derek arrived exactly on time, sat down across from me, looked confident, looked like a man who had all the leverage. So he said, 60%, ready to agree? Before I answer, I said, I have a question. How much did they offer you to bring me in? Your cut? His expression flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, Derek. I'm not stupid. You didn't do this out of the goodness of your heart. Someone's paying you. Probably 5%, maybe 10%. That's why you were so interested in my money you wanted a bigger score. He said nothing, which was confirmation enough. I'm going to make you a counteroffer, I said, but first I need to show you something. I pulled out my laptop, opened it to the portal I'd accessed, turned it toward him. His face went white. What is this? He whispered. This is Meridian's client portfolio, all of it, holdings, trades, private data. If I sent this to the SEC, how long do you think it would take for them to find something? Maybe the inflated fees, maybe the unauthorized trades, maybe just enough to trigger an audit. You can't. This isn't. I'm not going to send it, I said calmly. That's my counteroffer. You leave me alone and this stays private. You come after me again and I send everything to every regulator I can find. You can spend the rest of your career trying to explain why client data ended up in a competitor's hands. Derek stared at the screen. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. The weight of what I'd just done, the risk he was now carrying. This is bluff, he said finally. You can't actually expose us without exposing yourself. True, I admitted. But here's the thing. I'm an anonymous data entry guy who got lucky in the market. You're a registered representative with a professional license. Who do you think the regulators would believe? Who do you think would lose everything first? The silence stretched between us. This isn't over, he said finally. It is, I said. It is if you know what's good for you. He stood up. Left without another word. I sat there for another minute, letting the adrenaline settle, then closed the laptop and walked out. That was 3 months ago. I haven't heard from Derek since. My money's still in my accounts, my skills are still in my head, and my secret is still mine. I've started thinking about what comes next. Maybe I'll enter some professional competitions. Maybe I'll build a business. Maybe I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, watching, learning, becoming better. The thing is, there's no ceiling to what I can learn. I watched a surgeon perform a simulation once, and now I could probably pass a medical exam. I watched a fighter pilot describe her training, and now I understand aerodynamics better than most engineers. I've seen hackers break into systems, and now I know how to prevent it. I've watched diplomats negotiate peace deals on television, and now I understand the art of the deal. The world is full of experts, and I'm the one person who can become any of them. The question is, what do I want to become? For now, I'm happy being the